The Italian economy is growing. It's growing after 3 years ended in 2014 of prolonged recession, which has produced significant damage in terms of loss of GDP, about 10 percentage points, but also in terms of loss of productive capacity, eroding the potential growth rate. This is why, by the way, the structural reform agenda is so more important, in addition to its own benefits, for the Italian case. It is growing, and as you know from data released yesterday, it is also generating jobs. There is a point here which is puzzling and interesting, because job creation seems to be higher than what would be warranted by the rate of growth of GDP. And this may indicate a number of issues, including that we need to revise GDP figures, but this is not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is that if there is more than proportional job creation and the economy is becoming more labor intensive, maybe this is a result of a welcome structural change, which would signal that one major structural reform, the Jobs Act, is actually delivering fruits. Here, let me say a few words. Of course, again, I don't have to say to this audience how delicate the banking situation is, but my deep conviction is that the banking sector in Italy is moving in the right direction, not just in terms of leaving behind, perhaps at a somewhat slow speed, the legacy of the deep recession, namely NPLs, but not just that, but also moving towards a more robust structural configuration. And this is also the purpose of the major structural reforms that have been introduced: the Popolari reform, the cooperative banks reforms, the foundations self-reform, in addition to a number of measures that the government has introduced, dealing especially with the duration of litigation and credit recovery, and also with the introduction of instruments to provide a guarantee, state guarantee, in case of NPL transactions. So my view on this is that, first of all, as you all know, sometimes the numbers about NPLs in Italy are exaggerated. You have to take into account the right numbers, number one. Number two, NPLs above what one would consider as a normal amount are concentrated in a number of banks. And number three, it takes a little bit of time to return to more normal conditions, and this is not something that I say, something that the ECB says even and repeated very recently. So my view in a nutshell of the banking sector is that the reform measures are beginning to bear fruits, both in the management of the transition and a new configuration, which hopefully will see stronger banks, perhaps through some M&A operations, which we're already seeing in the market, and moving towards a new environment, which will be the European Banking Union, which has already been mentioned, needs to be completed, although maybe there are still some different views among member countries in the Eurozone persist, so we will have to go back to that point. But this trend will continue. The reason why I strongly support the constitutional reform, in addition to its value per se, is that it would bring huge economic benefits to the Italian economy, and vice versa. If it's not approved, we would have missed a great opportunity for improving the structural situation. Let me just give you a couple of examples. The elimination of the Senate as a full legislative body will have not just a reduction of the cost of doing politics, in addition to the cost of doing politics reduced by the abolition of the provinces, but it would of course streamline the legislative process, notably when the budget law is approved. And this will of course speed up the process, but also reduce to some extent the confrontation and litigation. A similar point, yet even less considered in the debate, is the impact of the reform of the Titolo Quinto, the Title V, which reassesses the distribution of power and jurisdiction away from regions towards the central government. It is important. It is, to me, the reason for voting yes at the referendum. Taxes will continue to be lowered. Some tax reduction is already factored in the previous stability law for 2016, and this relates to tax reduction for companies. ERS will be lowered from 27 to 24%. I am fully aware of the fact that lowering taxes is consistently a request coming from the business community. We have been lowering taxes both for households in terms of increasing their disposable income and for companies since the beginning. Some measures in the first budget introduced by the government also address the issue of the tax wedge, which of course is a key component of the competitiveness package. We will continue to do so. Of course, we have to do so credibly, so we will have to continue looking for financing of spending tax cuts through spending cuts, which we will continue to implement.